Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to everyone to yet another session of Quest today. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Rajshekhar Krishnan sir, who has graciously accepted our invitation and has joined us today. Before we begin, let us start with a prayer. Sarvatma sarvadrugyoso sarvadhyasa nirasakrit satatam sannidhatta me hridaye paramashivah. I welcome you to the interview session, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on the session. Thank you very much.
Viewers, before we begin, I would like to introduce Dr. Rajshekhar sir. Dr. Rajshekhar Krishnan is well-traveled globally and participates as a popular and articulate speaker on Indian wisdom distilled from the Vedas, Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita at various symposia, conferences, expert bodies and think tanks. His life mission is to restore Indian wisdom to its rightful role of energizing and inspiring the Indian polity to be world leaders in the 21st century. He is a seasoned corporate leader, mentor, coach, facilitator, and trainer with a proven track record possessing over 34 years of corporate experience, including IBM Flipkart, of which 24 years are in the fields of leadership training, learning and development, organizational development, and human performance improvement, both at Indian and international levels. Currently, he is conducting Bhagavad Gita for professionals and also preparing to present a paper on consciousness-based leadership at an international conference. Dr. Rajshekhar Krishnan has founded Advaita Consultants, which offers cutting-edge solutions powered by the genius of the ancient wisdoms, intuitive wisdom, as well as the reliability of modern world's scientific findings. Sir, thank you for joining us today. And to begin with, let me ask this question, which we ask all of our interviewers. That is, could you please tell us a bit about your upbringing and your initial influences of life and about your education?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'm indeed honored to be interviewed by you. So I was born in a family which was a very interesting combination of the spiritual and the scientific, because my father was a doctorate in polymer chemistry, and my mother was very spiritual and religious. And therefore, the influences of my father are seen perhaps in the great affinity and affection I have for the logic of thought. And of course, the spirituality of my mother and her father, that is my maternal grandfather, who was a great influence too, because I used to go to his house on weekends, and he had a large number of spiritual books, which were very fascinating for me to actually even touch and look and feel and maybe read the title and try to understand what it was. So I would say that the initial influences were from the immediate family. And my grandfather was insistent that he took us to Swami Chinmayananda's Gita lectures, Swami Dayananda Saraswati's Gita lectures, when Swami Dayananda Saraswati was a part of Swami Chinmayananda's organization. And this is many, many years ago. So those are some of the childhood influences. And I think the quest for spiritual wisdom, the roots of that were laid on account of the family that I've spoken about.
And I think the family plays a major role in our upbringing. And as you mentioned, our fathers and grandfathers will play such an important role in our life, also shaping our future. Could you please tell us a bit about your education? How was your modern education go about?
Okay, so I have a kind of interesting background in the sense that I was educated in Delhi, where I was born. Then when I was very young, my father went to the US to do his postdoctoral fellowship, and he took the family along with him. So I did the first 2-3 years of my schooling in the US. But thereafter, we came back to India, and it was based totally in Delhi. And the schooling was in a typical, Christian missionary school. And it was, of course, the family background that actually nurtured my interest in spiritual wisdom and matters. I went on to do my engineering at one of the National Institute of Technologies, then called Motilal Nehru Regional Engineering College, Allahabad, where I did my mechanical engineering. So that's my formal education, though many, many years later in 2006, that is, I passed out in 1983. And in 2006, when I was around 46, 47 years old, I registered for a PhD program on leadership development and spirituality. It was a combination of a number of streams of disciplines. And I completed and submitted my thesis, and it was accepted. And in 2012, I was awarded a PhD degree. So it's been, and the reason for this is, I had high standards of my teachers, and somehow after college, I was not too appreciative of the qualities of some of my teachers, which is perhaps a part of the Indian tradition or against the Indian tradition. We can always discuss that, because you have, Yagyavalkya, who said that he already knows what some of his teachers were to tell him. But yes, I think my career has been shaped by these educative influences, and the fact that I did not demand from others what I did not do myself. And therefore, if I had high standards of expectations from my teachers, then when I'm a teacher myself, I have high standards that I hope I adhere to in terms of clarity of concept, clarity of expression, and of course, understanding the doubts that my students may have. So that's my educational background, formally in terms of what would be regarded as modern education. But I'm sure that you have a follow-up question on this.
Yes, yes. I think you have a fascinating journey throughout your education and your life. And as you mentioned, you heard about Gita and Upanishads from Swami Chinmayananda and Swami Dayanand Saraswati. But what made you take up the study of these? Because we would have been introduced by others, but what made you take up this?
So again, you see, I've been a lover of books. And while, of course, when you attend a public lecture, you're sitting maybe rows away, and there is obviously no resolution in terms of your doubts. You only hear. It's a one-way transmission, which by itself is very good. But I think again, I'll have to go back to my maternal grandfather, who had all these books. So two very interesting books on the Gita. See, one is Bhagavad Gita, a very short version for students by C. Rajagopalachari. And my grandfather had the original edition, which was published by Times of India in 1938, which is a fascinating one, because currently the book is published by Bharati Vidya Bhavan. And I had the very original edition of Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan's Bhagavad Gita, which was published way back in 1947, because in those days, these were the Bhagavad Gita translations that were available. Now, since these books were there at my grandfather's house, I used to constantly on weekends browse over them as a kid, 7, 8, 9, 10, because I used to go every weekend to my grandfather's house. And I simply wanted to understand them, because for me, the touch and feel of any book was fascinating. Moreover, these books were books that were kept in a very, very sacred place in the puja room. And my grandfather used to often get annoyed with me because I used to pick them up from where they were kept, and I used to try to understand them. But I think he understood my bent of mind, and after some time, he just let me be. So I would say that the two influences. One is the presence of a referable guru. So to me, the book became a referable guru, because if I did not understand anything, I could always go back to the book. The statement which I did not understand remained as it is, but my understanding grew as I came back to the paragraphs, statements, or shlokas again and again. Whereas to me, at least in the form that the guru appeared physically, which was the public discourses, that did not afford to me the ability to question or to go back, because what has been said, while of course the Indian tradition is all about Shruti, but then I don't think we are that capable in the Kali Yuga to remember exactly every word that has been said in a public discourse. So I would say that the driver for my learning, therefore, came to be books, which is, of course, quite different from what the Indian tradition says. But I started going into more and more books by Chinmayananda ji and by Dayananda ji and by the Ramakrishna Mission, which has so many publications. So books became my means. And I also found out that many of these books on the Gita are actually compilations of what the famous gurus have spoken about the Gita. So their lectures, what they say, have been condensed together. So to me, it was a combination of Shruti, because someone would have heard them, and it's a combination of Lipi, because I have it in front of me. So my learning methodology was Shruti and Lipi. And at one point in time, the Lipi became the Shruti, because I could hear the words talking to me from the book. So if you ask me, I'm one of those odd fellows who have learned from books, but I have a special relationship with books, and they have taught me all that I know, which is quite contrary to what people say. You must have a living guru. And therefore, that is the answer that I have to present to you. Shruti and Lipi.
Wonderful, sir, wonderful. Apart from reading books and going through them, did you have any formal guru that you went to and addressed your questions? Anything like that, sir?
So you see, I evolved a methodology, which I think I just hinted at. So I did not go to any formal guru, but I discovered that the methodology that I created for myself is actually also mentioned in our scriptures. So let me tell you what I used to think, which is that, look, I don't have anybody's ill will in mind, and therefore I am trying to understand this through the books that I have. And a book can teach me as much as a guru can teach me. And, we need to constantly keep referring to the book. And I have made these points. Now, this is actually there in our scriptures in two very interesting extracts. One is from Uddhava Gita. If you've read Uddhava Gita, you know that the second chapter is about the Avadhuta, who talks about his 24 gurus. He's learned this from the peacock, he's learned this from the goat, he learned this from the sky, he learned this from the tree. So therefore, you have a whole range of learning opportunities, and the guru is in physical form or in non-physical form, but the guru is a learning opportunity, and your receptiveness to the guru is most important. Okay, so that is one learning. And the second learning is, what does the presence of a physical guru do? The presence of a physical guru obviously resolves your doubts, but your doubts get resolved with your sadhana, and they are actually resolved internally. Though if you are very perplexed by your doubt, you would want a redressal of that by the guru immediately. So if you actually read Sanat Sujatiya, which is a very famous text in the Mahabharata, is one of the Pancharatnas of the Mahabharata, I realized that, as Sanat Sujata told Dhritarashtra, that forgetfulness, heedlessness is the primary reason why we don't achieve anything. And therefore, to me, the combination of you can learn from all possible sources, which for me was books, and the fact that it is forgetfulness that makes us actually want a physical guru, apart from the resolution of the doubt. But to me, a book represented all that a guru had to say, because if you actually step out to write a book, you will find you'll have to condense all the learning that you had. It is not easy. So every word, every sentence in a book, to me, is loaded with not only the surface meaning, but the deeper meaning behind it. And therefore, I've had a very unusual, uncharacteristic, non-Sanatana Dharmi tradition inculcation into our tradition. But then, of course, I do appreciate in hindsight that it is important to have a guru. But you see, it was not my karma to have a guru when I wanted one. And therefore, I've always felt that When the Shishya is ready, you could be a highly advanced Shishya, and the Guru will come in physical form or in notional form to resolve your doubts. So it all depends on how well you have progressed. Now, people may want a Guru for the very basic steps. Sir, what is Bhagavad Gita? There are 18 chapters in Bhagavad Gita. I felt for all these factual, basic issues, I can buy, tons of, and of course, you have to read them. Buying the book is not the solution, reading them, but I have a great affection for reading, and that has been my journey.
Wonderful, sir. I wouldn't call this as non-Sanatana Dharma, because from the devotees of Ramana Maharshi, we understand that some of their questions were just addressed in his Maunam at it.
Exactly.
So I wouldn't call it as non-Sanatana Dharma.
Yeah. I mean, typically at the surface, it would seem like that, but you're very right. It is not so, because it's a little unusual to say this. That's why I'm saying, I would say not the established practice, but it is definitely a part of the entire tradition. You're right.
Correct. And moving on, sir, you mentioned you have an engineering degree, and now you are a leadership coach, and much more you do from your consultant firm. How did your transition from an engineer to leadership and development coach happen? Was it very decision that you took out of your interest? Did some situation make you take this journey?
I would say it is prarabdha karma. So I'll tell you. Now, as a youngster, I must confess, and this is a public forum, that I had a speech impediment. Okay. I used to speak very fluently till the age of 5 or 6. Then I had some very high fever. And thereafter, I started stumbling over my words, and my speech became very, very difficult to understand by people. And that was a situation that continued for many years. Now, I did graduate as an engineer, and I had that speech impediment, which is called stammering, and it was something that used to bother me. And I was actually looking at ways and means of, getting rid of the impediment. And when I analyzed myself, because understanding your swabhava is very important, as we learn from the Bhagavad Gita. So I figured out that there are 2-3 things that would help me. One is I started to notice when I was stammering, and I discovered that if I don't have clarity of thought about whatever I'm talking about, probably I stammer. Number 2, I figured out that if I don't have the vocabulary and searching for a word, probably then I stammer. And the third thing that I noticed was that I stammer when I'm emotionally upset, because my mind is running all over the place. Now with this, I realized that all the reading that I'm doing is giving me more clarity of thought with whatever I've said. And to actually pursue the emotional stability of mind, meditation is an important aspect of it from various perspectives. So I started meditating, and then I slowly was able to cure myself. And of course, you're hearing me today after so many years. I'm saying this because at some point in time when you're young, you're very self-conscious about your weaknesses, but then I'm not self-conscious because it's no longer a weakness, it's strength now. Okay, so what I wanted to do was I wanted to push myself to a kind of profession where only talking would be the source of happiness and income. So as an engineer, you're involved with machines. So it was, of course, this is all hindsight. You don't plan it that way. So I moved into the role of a trainer. Now you can imagine someone who's been having this weakness of speech. If you go into the job of training, which is a modern way of saying vyakhyanam, you're going to do vyakhyanam, then obviously you need to have the fluency of thought and fluency of expression. So I actually moved into training. And if you understand the corporate world, you begin as a trainer at the lower levels, you do communication skills, presentation skills, and so on. So over a period of time, as you mature, you also become a leadership development specialist. And that's where it is at that moment when I moved from being a trainer, which means standing in front of an audience and training them, talking to them, answering their questions. I've been doing this for years. Since 1994, I've been doing it, and I'm quite comfortable with any audience, anywhere, anytime. Middle of the night, you wake me. And therefore, it is prarabdha karma that I had a speech impediment, which has been overcome so successfully that I'm now in the profession where what I say is a part of the entire exercise. So I moved into leadership as I became a senior trainer. And then, of course, as I shared with you earlier, I did my PhD in leadership development. My thesis was a study of personality traits, spiritual transcendence, and leadership styles in India. So it actually brought together all my interests of psychology, my interest in spirituality, and of course, my interest in understanding leadership, because that was the job that I was doing. I was then the general manager of one of the major multinationals who operate in India. And that has been my transition to leadership development and leadership coaching, helping people to become better leaders.
That's quite a journey, sir, definitely. And your perseverance to overcome the impediment and how you overcame it is just, we all take lessons from it, definitely.
I can laugh over it now, but let me tell you, I used to weep over it when I was younger, because it is a very, very embarrassing impediment, because it stares at you at the face, right? The moment
Correct.
you open your mouth, people will realize that this person has got a problem. But then, of course, it does not matter. Now, I think my speech is as smooth as anyone else's, and hopefully influential with all the knowledge that I've gathered.
Definitely, sir. And what made you establish the Vida Consultants, a leadership and organizational consulting firm? What was the intuition behind it, sir?
Okay, first I must correct you. It's not Vaida, it is Veda. Now, the traditional spelling of Veda is V-E-D-A.
Correct.
So what I did was I just varied the spelling, calling W-A-Y-D-A, Veda.
Okay, sorry, yeah, I stand corrected, yes.
No. So, of course, it has also been read as Vaida, because Vaida, in Hindi means promise. So, I mean, that too can be taken to be the pronunciation, though it's not the primary pronunciation. But even if you mistake it, yes, I say we keep true to our promises. And our promise is, so the byline of Veda Consultants is ancient wisdom, modern solutions. So through the course of my, reading, of course, I've read the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, multiple versions. You can see this library behind me. There is actually on my right side, on my left side, you have all these shelves, and this is my study room. So it has a huge collection of books built over a lifetime. And I have read the books. I've kind of understood whatever I can. And so the point is that I realized that because I've worked for multinationals, I've been a part of the modern workforce of India with my degrees not in Sanskrit, not in a Veda Pathshala, but my degrees in engineering and my degree, which was the PhD degree, through which I was a part of the modern stream of thinking. And I realized that much of what, at least in the corporate training arena, that comes down to us comes down from the West.
Correct.
And to me, it was, there were 2-3 things that struck me. One is that whatever, training or, training itself is a function within HR, and whatever HR, foundational thought processes that you have are all based on Western psychology and Western organizational behavior, organizational development, and they lack depth. So I used to constantly wonder, why is it that nobody speaks about the Indian wisdom? Because on one hand, everybody in India will say, oh, India is the Jagat Guru of the world. Wow, everybody has all these wonderful statements. Oh, we have the Vedas. You ask them how many Vedas are there, how many mandalas are there, nobody will know a thing. But there is great pride in being Indian, but there is the pride of ignorance, which is so very rampant, at least in the corporate world. I mean, I don't expect them to actually chant the Vedas, but the point is that the wisdom that is there within the Mahabharata, the Vidura Niti, the Arthashastra, and there are tremendous resources available, is somehow totally forgotten or deemed to be ancient, deemed to be superstitious, deemed to be out of touch with the times. But I found out that human nature has not changed from the time of composition of the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Gita and the Mahabharata, the Itihasa and the Puranas have all understood human nature far better than Western psychology. Western psychology has made its little progress, but Western psychology is just about 200 years old, whereas our Indian tradition is 5,000 at the least, if not more, depending upon what kind of timelines you believe in and how you are looking at the Aryan invasion theory. And, we know a whole load of thinking that goes behind that. But the point is that there is a tremendous tradition of having dealt with every conceivable problem that can arise between man and man, between man and team, between man and society. It may not be labeled so because it's a part of a flowing Itihasa tradition. So it is for us to have pride in our heritage and extract the lessons, because India was a very successful society. India was not a failure as it is deemed to be made out, and we all know that. India had a large proportion. And why did all these invaders come to India? Because of the wealth of material prosperity and spiritual wisdom that India represented. So I said, if you ask anybody currently, nobody knows anything. So somebody has to bell the cat. And as Mahatma Gandhi says, you must be the change that you want to see. So I said, okay, I'll start Veda Consultants. It's a very small one-person organization. But the fact of the matter is, even the name is highly suggestive. It tells people what the organization is about. And I thought of the various things that can be done. And Bhagavad Gita is a vehicle that is a very universal vehicle, which is revered all across India. And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita is the current rod, lightning rod to draw the wisdom and to spread the wisdom.
That's very wonderful, sir. I think all of us can be benefited from this consultant firm. And as you mentioned in your previous answer about your PhD thesis, it is titled A Study of Personality Traits, Spiritual Transcendence, and Leadership Styles in India. I can see so many different domains that has been brought together, and many questions would have been answered. Could you please tell a bit about the thesis that you presented?
Okay, so the thesis basically explored, you see, in a PhD thesis, you just have to understand the ground that has already been trodden by the previous researchers and hope to add a little bit more, because you're not embarking on a full-fledged research career. You're just beginning your research career. So I wanted to, so the relationship between personality and leadership styles has been established. So what I wanted to do was to study, since everybody says that India is a very spiritual nation, so I wanted to check whether spirituality really influenced. So if I have a certain personality trait, and that personality trait leads to a certain leadership style, would the presence of spirituality influence the impact of that personality trait to enhance my leadership? That was what my study was all about. I found that in some instances it does, in some instances it does not do, but that's nothing. So that's the research factor. You have statistics and you have to have your methodologies in place. So, and you deal with a very small sample. It's not that you're dealing with an all India sample. You deal with a small sample, which is an IT company here in Bangalore, whose managers I had sampled. And therefore, some of them did demonstrate the spirituality, which led to their enhanced effectiveness as leaders. But many of them did not, because the IT industry is typically an industry which is so logical that spirituality is thrown out of the window. You would not find very many spiritual people in the IT industry. But of course, that's the reason why I think in Bangalore, we find a lot of people who pursue spirituality in off time, because obviously it becomes a very important way to maintain your balance and your sanity and prevent the burnout that these very, very high stress jobs in IT demand. So that's the whole idea behind the thesis. And it was more of an expression of understanding the entire panorama of leadership studies that have been done and proving a small point, because as a novice researcher, which is what you are when you're doing a PhD, of course, there's a lot of work that's involved. I don't want to pull down my own thesis, a lot of work, because it took 7 years to put it all together. But nevertheless, when I look at it in hindsight, it is just a baby step that you take to understand certain phenomena, which is recognized by the authorities in the academia to be a universally fitted into a methodology. So it's not something, so I can't be a mystic and say, I have just got this from, the cosmos. The Brahman told me. I cannot get a PhD on the basis of that, at least with the current methodologies that are there in academia.
Okay. And so is there any chance for our viewers who are listening who can go and read your thesis? Is it put up on any platform?
Yeah, it is there in Shodh Ganga. Shodh Ganga is the Indian site where all the theses that are submitted to Indian universities are collected together. It's available. So if you actually type out, there my name is K. Rajshekhar, not Rajshekhar Krishnan, then you will actually come across my thesis, and all the chapters are there, all the references are there, and you can obviously read that. So it is available, definitely.
I think our viewers will be definitely benefited from that. Yeah. And I was going through your LinkedIn profile and I came through a lot of things. But what struck me was your bio. That is, you have mentioned it as restoring Indian wisdom in the roles of energizing and inspiring Indian polity to be world leaders. So could you please elaborate on this? What do you mean by energizing and inspiring Indian polity?
Yeah, so if India, as I said earlier, has been regarded justifiably as a Jagat Guru, then the products of a Jagat Guru culture should be world leaders. It's but a logical extrapolation of the idea. So the thing is that good leadership is all about self-management. Good leadership stems from two factors. One is that within yourself, you don't have a break. You are integrated, you are self-realized. And the second factor is, while obviously in the phenomenal world around us, there is differentiation. It is not that people are the same, but if you understand the differentiated natures of people and the linking spiritual unity that binds them, then you are a wise leader, because you see, you are not discriminating, but you are acknowledging the difference. Acknowledging the difference makes you capable of respecting people and using their talents. And this is the way of this is the Rajarishi tradition that we have, where the leader is someone who is an example. And the Indian philosophy does not believe in personal is different and professional is different. We have this dichotomy that we have in the West, which says that personal life is personal life, professional life is professional life. But then that doesn't work out, because I am the same person who is there at home and who is there in the profession. Therefore, I would very strongly believe that, Indians are doing well. You see, if you look at the Indian leadership profile across multinational organizations, you find Indians at the helm of affairs. Now, they have intuitively imbibed what is Indian, because they all grew up in India. All these leaders that you find, of course, in India, you have leaders, but you see what happens in India is there's a phrase in Hindi which I may use. There's a phrase is "Ghar ki murgi dal barabar." That is, what is in your backyard you don't respect. If the same Indian goes abroad and succeeds, you say, oh my, he's an Indian. He's from the Jagat Guru land. So we are foolish because we don't respect our own selves within our own land. And therefore, the idea is that we should not be the ones who get recognition only in foreign shores, but we should be people who are able to obviously believe in what is Indian and do what we can, and of course, succeed globally, no doubt. Indians are highly flexible, highly capable. They are always respected in every community they go. And they are people who should now look to propelling their own country at a faster pace with the kind of thoughts they have, which are now dedicated to the services of the Western nations, right? Every Indian's brains are being tapped better by the West than by the Indians themselves.
Definitely.
So that's the tragedy of India, where we don't contribute our intellectual capability within India. And of course, it is also a sorry commentary on the Indian system, which is unable to recognize its own talent because it has not understood the fact that, Yo mam pashyati sarvatra sarvam cha mai pashyati tasyaham na pranashyami sachamena pranashyati. So he who looks at me equally everywhere, I don't go away for him and he doesn't go away for me. That's a very famous shloka that we have in the Bhagavad Gita, as you would know. So we need to have that kind of leadership in India, which goes beyond our current paradigms.
Correct. And you also speak a lot about the ancient science of consciousness and consciousness-based leadership. This term, consciousness-based leadership, is very new to me personally. What is this consciousness-based leadership? And please tell a bit about that.
Okay, so consciousness can be examined from 2 points of view. One is what I call the material vector. The other is what I call the spiritual vector. Now, a vector is a direction, as you know from our basic study in mathematics. So the material vector has been pursued by Western science, by modern science. And as various researchers in quantum mechanics and particle physics, we find that there are newer and newer particles being discovered. And at one point in time, the particles are not really physical. They are actually only mathematical entities, mathematical properties, and you discover them in high energy equipment like you have in the colliders and particle accelerators. So I'm sure that as you have greater and greater energy to research, when I say energy research in terms of the magnetic power that is generated, the circulating, the momentums. Of course, I'm not a physicist to be able to use the accurate terminology. You will find that in the years to come, there will be more and more esoteric particles being discovered. So at some point in time, I think the theoreticians in physics figured that there must be something that's behind whatever we are predicting. And they have not been able to come to that, and that's the big debate. So that they are labeling as consciousness, saying that there has to be an intelligent principle behind the universe, which is at the substratum. Now, this is exactly what Vedanta says, as you would know, because when you say Sat, Sat is an existence that cannot be negated. That's the fundamental definition of Sat. Chit is awareness and Ananda. So the substratum, so willy-nilly, modern science is coming to the conclusion that the universe is based on a very intelligent fabric, principle, substratum, foundation. There are no words which you have in the English language to express this, but in the Indian Sanskrit terminology, it's called Brahman, and it is of the nature of Sat, Chit and Ananda, which is a very fundamental Vedantic statement. So the fact is that the Mahavakyas that we have, that is Aham Brahmasmi, Pragyanam Brahma, these are all indicative of the fundamental premise of the Indian tradition lies in the principle that this foundation is the basis of the universe. And if I can identify as they say, yatha brahmande tatha pinde, what's there in the universe is there in the body. So if I can actually, through understanding, through bhakti, through my karma, appreciate that I'm not this body, I am the Atma embodied here, we become enlightened. So enlightenment is not something, where there's going to be a flash of light and suddenly there's a halo around the head. No, it is simply an intellectual realization. Of course, it comes with a lot of effort to have the conviction and the shraddha over a period of time. And it is a grace of the universal, of Brahman, because Ramana Maharshi says, he was asked, who is the guru? So he says that the self, God, and the guru are all one and the same because they are all representative of the fabric of the universe. So the point is that when we say consciousness-based leadership, we are basically saying someone who's self-realized, who understands that he is not the body, he is not the role, he is not the CEO, but he is an Atman who is working for his own spiritual upliftment and in the process working towards the economic development of his company. So it is not that you will be some woolly-headed person who does not understand the reality. So Paramarthika and Vyavaharika, if you have Paramarthika success, Vyavaharika success will follow. That is the Indian tradition. So when you are Paramarthika, the modern terminology we use is consciousness-based leadership, because the West will not understand Paramarthika and Vyavaharika unless they go through Advaita Vedanta and they go through some Shastric studies, and Western science is veering over to understanding this, but still hesitates to use the terminology. That's a very, very well-established, well-honed terminology in India. I have a dictionary of Advaita Vedanta, which is published by the Ramakrishna Mission. Some 1,500 terms. So can you imagine? Just one tenet of, and we have numerous tenets. We have Shuddha Dvaita, we have Bheda Abheda, we have so many tenets. So it is just darshana that we have. So the tradition of understanding that, see, they may differ in details when it comes to darshana, but everybody agrees that there is one supreme power.
Correct.
You may choose to call it by whatever name. You may call it Brahman, you may call it Krishna, the supreme Godhead, the supreme personality of Godhead, which is how ISKCON describes it. So it is foolish to fight over terminology. I think we need to understand. So as Ramana Maharshi says, all these are man-made distinctions. So once we understand, the question of differentiation does not arise at a fundamental level, and differentiation has to be understood at a Vyavaharika level for us to run society very well. So all of us are limbs of society and limbs of the organization. And therefore, consciousness-based leadership is a modern avatar of Raja Rishi, but it is something that I think the West has taken up now because it's slowly realizing the value. And, that's exactly the paper that I presented, that consciousness-based leadership has been expounded very strongly in the Gita, because Atmanam Vidhi is the first principle of the Bhagavad Gita. Know yourself.
Correct. And this has been continuously been established in our tradition through Nitya Viveka thing that we come across. The Jnani who has realized that everything is one and he sees everything as one, and he will be able to perform everything as required. He does not see second at all.
So the best karma yogis are bhakti yogis, jnana yogis. So actually, Aurobindo puts it very well. He calls it will, worship, and I think will, worship, and action. I think that's what he says. No, knowledge, will, worship, and knowledge, right? So these are the three paths. And, we need to blend the three, though each one of the traditions will give primacy to one of the paths. But then when we actually pursue them, we will realize that it's a matter of inclination in terms of what we choose first, though each darshana or each point of view has a recommendation of what to choose first. But these are all, semantics, and in the end, it all blends together. It is more for our own understanding that the Bhagavad Gita splits it into Bhakti Marga, Jnana Marga, Dhyana Marga, Buddhi Yoga. These are all various terminologies used for our understanding, but practice is important. And therefore, we need to actually take up the Bhagavad Gita. Though there are a lot of other texts available, my personal opinion is that this is the most relatable. Of course, I would love to talk about Ashtavakra Gita and Ribhu Gita and the so many other Gitas available, but then they are a little specialized and they don't reach out to the masses that easily unless they have some initiation. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita, at some point in time, I think everything has been said about the Bhagavad Gita, but the Bhagavad Gita is such a beautiful text that no matter what has been said by how many people, each person can discover and will discover a newer commentary for himself or herself, which is exactly at the level of your own understanding. And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita is a very, very effective way of trying to establish leadership, trying to establish a yogic regimen, trying to establish within yourself the realization that leads you to becoming a Sthita Pragya, which is chapter 2.
Wonderful. And this leads to my next question. That is, the goal of Vedanta, as we understand, is to attain self-knowledge. And you do a lot of leadership training, coaching. So do you also talk about the ultimate purpose and purpose of all this to your trainees?
Well, it depends on who the trainees are in the first place. It also depends upon what exactly I'm doing, in the sense that if it's a full-fledged Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapter, then we allow the Bhagavad Gita's flow to help people realize what they need to do. And in between every chapter, there is this exhortation to action, which makes it a very, very Vyavaharika aspect of the Gita. But yes, you see, to someone who's got 3 years experience, if you go and say self-realization is the goal, then he will never ever come to your Gita class again. So obviously you should know what you're talking about. But I think the most important thing is the teacher's credibility. Correct. See, it is not the teacher's, quotability. I can keep throwing Bhagavad Gita shlokas to show how knowledgeable I am about the Bhagavad Gita, but that does not make me relate to the individual. So to relate to the individual, the message has to be, of course, based on the Gita, but should be couched in the language that is understood by the individual. So with the younger audience, obviously, I'm not going to begin with talking about self-realization. I'm going to be talking about sense control, anger management, stress management, how to handle, mental ups and downs. That's what and what is the structure of our, body, mind, intellect complex, which is the terminology that we used, So it is tuned to the requirements. And if it's a more senior audience, people who are perhaps successful professionals who have got success in their areas of eminence and expertise, and now are understanding, they're not pursuing wealth. They have made the wealth. Now they're pursuing understanding. Now they're pursuing a greater meaning and purpose to their lives. So for them, definitely I will say that, look, unless you understand who you are, you will not know. So, one of the very famous little booklets which has tremendous value is Nan Yar by Ramana Maharshi. Who am I? There are 28 questions there, which if you can absorb and understand, you don't need to read anything else at all. So I do introduce, Ramana Maharshi because they, at least, he is the kind of guru who's come to me at the right time. So in conclusion to the previous discussions that I was guruless, so I think, when the Shishya is ready, the guru arrives. So I mentally kind of accept and, appreciate and feel that I'm guided by Ramana Maharshi in whatever that I'm doing now. But of course, perfection is far away. Let's understand that we are all human beings. We are working constantly for our self-development. And just because you say Ramana Maharshi, it does not mean that you are at any level, anywhere remotely near the eminence that he is, or any one of the gurus. I'm choosing the name of Ramana Maharshi because of my, and one more reason which I must add, looping back to what I said earlier on, my grandfather had pictures of Ramana Maharshi as well as books that he had actually purchased in 1941 from the Ramana Ashram.
Okay.
And, those were also some of the books that I read. So I was always curious. So I'm so happy that Ramana Maharshi is now a guiding force in my life. And hopefully when the pandemic is over, I will definitely make a trip to Tiruvannamalai and do the circuit. That's my hope.
Okay. And I think the most fascinating work is his talks that has been published in a huge volume. I think it makes more relatable to the readers. And also Bhagavad Gita answers each and everyone's questions in a different way. It addresses everyone's questions. That makes it wonderful. And I have an offshoot question. Sir, you have been involved in corporate training, you have been involved in HR and so many other responsibilities for over 3 decades. And we have been hearing this new term called inclusiveness in all the corporate companies and even in West and even in India now. So what do you think about Indian wisdom and Indian tradition? Are we inclusive of everything? Are we inclusive of all the people that we are, all the people? So what are your thoughts on this?
I am now opening up my Bhagavad Gita and I'm going to chant Shloka 32 of the 6th chapter, which is Atmo Pamyena Sarvatra Samam Pashyati Yorjuna Sukham Va Yadi Va Dukkham Sa Yogi Paramomata. That Yogi, O Arjuna, is regarded as supreme, who judges pleasure and pain everywhere by the same standard as he applies to himself. So this is the root of all emotional intelligence, root of all servant leadership. This is the root. That is, I feel the pain of the others as a yogi. So it's not that I'm going to be distressed by that, but I feel the pain. I can identify with the pain. And therefore, the whole business of inclusiveness is simply an offshoot of this shloka, which means that, and the understanding that we are in a differentiated world. Everybody is physically, intellectually, mentally different, which is why they are all born, right? They are born because they carry the vasanas from the previous janma. And you cannot question why the vasanas are there. Why is the vasana there? You don't know. You are not some kind of superior siddha who can go into the purva janma, prarabdhas of every individual. So you have to accept them as they are. So when you accept them as they are, then you realize your role in life. Your role in life is to support the spiritual evolution of people, no matter how they look or no matter what is their appearance or their inclination. So this inclusiveness is a part of the Indian tradition, because in India we have been inclusive of everybody who came to India, and that has been a strength and a weakness too. Because I was reading somewhere that we are so tolerant that we have to be sometimes intolerant of intolerance. People who demonstrate intolerance, we have to be intolerant of them so that we can maintain the tolerance that is a part of the Indian tradition. So actually, Indians are the most open and the most inclusive of all people. We don't need any lecturing around inclusiveness at all. But it's a modern corporate fad because it comes from the West, and the West is not inclusive in its primary orientation. They always have, me and the other, emic and etic, as you would know. That's always the terminology that's used in psychology. My culture and the other culture. So that's the reason why this is an offshoot. And as I said at an earlier stage of this interaction, that many of the things that come down to us and which are fads now in the corporate world are actually irrelevant from the perspective of the Gita. And sometimes when I see so many initiatives in LinkedIn or other places, I quite laugh because I find them to be so childish, and yet it is, couched in a lot of colorful terminology. And it's just one little word, as they say, one shloka from the Indian tradition can blast 1,000 books. And therefore, just one shloka or even one word from a shloka is a seed idea which contains an overarching influence over some of those ideas. So getting to know the Bhagavad Gita is a very interesting way. I might sound a little fanatical about it, but no, I'm simply grounding myself on the fact that I've read so many commentaries, and I am genuinely convinced, an intellectual conviction, conviction based on Shraddha, that if we only read the Bhagavad Gita, let's not read the Mahabharata, let's not read the Ramayana, let's only read 700 verses of the Gita and understand it up and down, probably we have a great degree of understanding to rely upon in our journey in life.
Correct, sir. Thank you. And in your new paper on Bhagavad Gita for consciousness-based development, you have argued that Bhagavad Gita can be used to induce the leadership qualities. Could you please explain this with some examples that you have propounded in your paper?
Yeah, so what I have said is, of course, pointed to some of the gaps in the current leadership development models, which I've hinted upon in this interaction. Then again, in this interaction, I've spoken about modern scientific consciousness studies, which come to the inevitable conclusion that there is consciousness as the substratum of the universe, and therefore the individual also. And then I say in the paper that the Bhagavad Gita is an ancient source book of consciousness-based leadership, Brahman-based, because what is Krishna saying all throughout? He's saying that realize yourself, Atmavan. And therefore, I would very seriously, contend that the Bhagavad Gita can be used. Of course, there are various levels at which it can be used. One is a full-fledged study of the 700 verses. Then you can have a selection of the verses. Then you can have what is called, these are all at various levels of, increasing simplicity. You have what are called Gita Suktas, like Yoga Karma Sukhaushalam, Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. So there are these little padas of the shloka, which are themselves concepts and very strong ones. So you can learn that. There are numerous professors who have, and scholars who have written about leadership development in the Gita. I'll not name them here, but there are many of them. So that can be used as a textbook to understand the practical applications. So the Bhagavad Gita becomes, and the fact is the Bhagavad Gita was a source book for rejuvenating the flailing leadership of Arjuna. Arjuna, we should not forget that the purpose was that his leadership was failing. He had his own doubts, and he was brought back to his senses. Nashto moha smritir labdhva. He was brought back to that by the advice of Lord Krishna. And also in between, we have a reference to the Raja Rishis like Janaka. And therefore, the Indian tradition has been leadership. So once you say Raja Rishi, you're talking about someone who consciously wants to lead society or an organ of society, and business is an organ of society. It's a well-known statement of Peter Drucker. And therefore, we need to have leaders who understand their purpose in life so that they can give direction. And of course, in business, the economic purpose is very, very important. But you have to find intelligent ways of doing that, not unscrupulous ways of doing that. So that's where the Bhagavad Gita would essentially aim at ethical and moral leadership, which is a modern way of understanding the fundamental principles of Rajarishi leadership. So I would say that the Bhagavad Gita is a very important sort of coaching manual, if we can use that kind of phrase, for telling you what is the theory and practice of good leadership.
Okay. I think this brings in a fresh air how we understand Bhagavad Gita and how we can make use of it in our daily lives. And we are almost coming to the final leg of our interview. And you have been studying Vedas, Upanishads, Indian wisdom. What is the teaching of the Vedanta that has most inspired you and influenced you, and that you carry till today?
Okay, so it's a very famous statement made by Swami Vivekananda. Atmano mokshartam jagata hitaya, which is first you have to work out your own self-realization. And then once you have attained an integration of your personality, then the demand is to do what you can to drive the benefit of the people around you, the evolution of the people around. Jagata hitaya cha. You work for the welfare of the people around you, which makes you a good leader, which makes you a good family person, which makes you a good whatever role that the Lord has given you. You will shine in that role, but you cannot shine in any role if you are a splintered personality. So that's the message of Vedanta, very, very simply and elegantly put by Swami Vivekananda. Atmano mokshartam jagata hitaya cha. So that's what I would like to conclude. I mean, if this is the conclusive part of the interaction.
Wonderful. That was wonderful, sir. And sir, it was great listening to you and answer all these wonderful questions. And your answers bring in so many insights into our day-to-day life from Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, and from the entire team of Advaita Academy. I thank you immensely for joining us today and sharing these thoughts with us today.
It's been my honor to be interviewed by you with such a good set of questions and follow-up questions. So I think I must express thanks to you for having me on this interview. And I wish the listeners all the best and wish them great glory and success in their careers. As I wish you well in the Advaita Academy. I have been a great admirer of the work that you do. I'm sure that you will do very well in the near future and in the times to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for that wonderful blessings that you have given us. And viewers, with this, we conclude yet another session of Quest. Please tune into our social media platforms for our new announcements on classes and other events. With this, we will conclude. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.